552 feet above the Straits of Mackinac, one can see a view that until 1957 was available only to birds and pilots. The Straits of Mackinac is a 5-mile wide stretch of water that was created by a melting glacier nearly 13,000 years ago. It is the meeting place of two of the 5 Great Lakes.
Here, through this 5-mile wide strip of water, known as the Straits of Mackinac, shipping men anticipate that one day more traffic will pass than the combined tonnage that sails through the Panama and Suez canals.
While connecting these bodies of water, the Straits acts as a barrier between Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas. Until the latter half of this century, a boat crossing was required in order to go from one part of the state to the other. That crossing used to take an hour or more, depending on the weather and the backup of traffic. In late November, as deer hunters converged to Michigan's game-rich UP, the wait for a ferry crossing could be as long as a day. Then came November 1st, 1957, the day the ferry stopped and the mighty Mac was opened. Who was behind the building of the Mackinac Bridge? Who thought of it first? How was it financed? Who designed the structure? Who actually built it? And what the heck is a pasty? It's 11 a.m. on a Saturday in late November, 55 stories above the Straits of Mackinac, over 750 feet above the bottom of the Straits. Retired ironworker J.C. Stillwell stands high atop Pier 20, the north tower of the Mackinac Bridge.
Last time I was up here was about 40 years ago, 1956. Me and Blackie Blackledge, Burwell, and Tallman, I guess his name was. We set the last piece.
J.C. is one of the hundreds of men who, starting in 1954, spent 42 months building the mighty Mac. A self-described young buck in those days, J.C. today runs the Mackinac Bridge Museum in Mackinac City. Only 24 hours prior to this visit to the top of Pier 20, 75-mile-an-hour winds had forced the Mackinac Bridge Authority to temporarily close the structure to traffic as a standard safety procedure. While the bridge itself is practically aerodynamically transparent, vehicles such as high-profile trucks are not. So on the rare occasions when the winds in the Straits area reach such velocity, the result can be escorted convoys led by the Bridge Patrol.
They got that bridge open yet?
Yeah, they're letting everything across with an escort. And I'm in the middle of the bridge right now, and it's not that bad at all.
Yeah, well, I'll thank a big truck for waking me up. Two guys said, oh, yeah, we'll wake you up, we'll wake you up. I've been here since noon waiting for them to start the escorts, and I fell asleep, and nobody woke me up.
Hey, I'm waking you up. Come on.
Yeah, I've never had flashing lights in front of me. They always seem to be behind me.
We're just in time. Here comes our escort.
From the time the structure opened in 1957 until the completion of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York in 1964, the Mackinac Bridge was the world's longest suspension bridge. And today, when measured from anchor block to anchor block, the mighty Mac still holds the record as being the longest. But unlike the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, the Mackinac is nearly 300 miles from any large population. So where does the story begin? Prentice M. Brown, Jr. is a lifelong resident of St. Ignace, Michigan, one of the earliest settlements in North America, and the town at the north bridgehead of the mighty Mac. Prentice M. Brown, Sr. is known as the father of the Mackinac Bridge.
He was born here in 1889 and lived all of his life, at least most of it, in St. Ignace. He became interested in the Mackinac Bridge in the early years.
Lawrence A. Rubin was the first person hired by the Mackinac Bridge Authority in 1950. He served as the executive secretary of the authority until his retirement in 1983. He is also the author of 2 books about the bridge, Mighty Mac and Bridging the Straits, The Story of Mighty Mac. He resides in St. Ignace, close to the Mackinac Bridge.
In my research, I go back and find references to it in February of 1884, when one editor of a paper close by said the experiment to provide year-round transportation across the Straits by boat has failed, and the only way we're ever going to have a connection is by building a bridge or a tunnel and and the main difficulty is the financing. The man had tremendous sense of the future.
When Mackinac Bridge was first envisioned, and this was really before the turn of the century, there was a fellow by the name of Salson who ran a dry goods store down on our main street, and he had a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge, and he used it here, and someday he thought that maybe that would inspire a bridge across the Straits of Mackinac.
Others, too, were interested in building a bridge, including Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the board members of the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. On July 1st, 1888, he said, "We now have the largest, well-equipped hotel of its kind in the world for short-season business. Now what we need is a bridge across the straits." Nearly 60 years later, William Stewart Woodfell, the self-styled innkeeper of the Grand Hotel, became one of the prime movers in the pursuit of a straits bridge.
Back in the 30s, in the late 30s, just before World War II, Murray D. Van Wagner, who was also a member of the original Bridge Authority, was highway commissioner and later governor. They built the causeway that you see leading from the north bank of the Straits of Mackinac south, and that extends out into the Straits of Mackinac by about a mile, a little more than a mile, and that saved a lot of money for this bridge construction. It was kind of interesting to know that they had done that back in the late 30s, and it was going to help the bridge.
Then came Pearl Harbor. The double suspension bridge was shot right off the drawing board.
Whoa, some pretty hefty bombs to blow away a drawing. Fortunately, they missed the causeway. And following World War II, the idea of a bridge was brought up again, this time by a young politician who was running for governor of Michigan and was on the campaign trail in St. Ignace.
That is true. Soapy Williams, G. Menon Williams, who was running for governor in 1948, Soapy did come to St. Ignace, and he was getting a haircut. And Soapy, of course, was a great person for meeting people. If he went to a supper somewhere, he'd meet everybody everywhere. And anyway, he talked to the barber here in St. Ignace, and indeed he did come out and advocate for Mackinac Bridge. And he said, if I am elected, I'm going to do everything I can to have a bridge built across the Straits of Mackinac.
The building of the bridge was not as big a problem as far as I was concerned as getting the money. We encountered extreme provincialism on the part of the East Coast financiers who had only a vague idea of Michigan, which they thought was close to California. We tried first to get some big underwriter to take it on, and they turned us down despite the connections of Prentice M. Brown, a former United States Senator, chairman of the board of Detroit Edison, and Charles T. Fisher, the vice chairman, who was the president, chairman of the board of the National Bank of Detroit, one of the largest banks in the country. And they had all the contacts that anybody could dream about for a project of this kind. But because it was a bridge perceived to be in a remote area with 900 persons living in Mackinac City, one bridgehead, and 3,000 in the other bridgehead, and being 300 miles from the nearest big center of population, the New Yorkers just couldn't conceive of a project involving $100 million in this area.
The two big projects, I suppose, that were most pressing was, number one, financing, and number two, could it be done?
One of the first acts of the authority was to engage a group of prominent long-span bridge engineers, including the internationally known Dr. David B. Steinman, destined to design the greatest bridge of his career.
There were a number of other things that all combined to give the financiers doubts about it. In addition to the paucity of the population, the winds and the ice and the flow of the water through the straits was condemned by many people, presumably in the know, and they said no, a bridge couldn't be built that would withstand the forces of nature up here.
Throughout the country and all over the world, somehow people seem to boast of the severity of their meteorological conditions, and they don't realize that the same nature that presents these forces also presents us with the laws whereby these forces can be conquered. And that's what engineering is, the application of natural laws for the mastery of natural forces.
Oh, he was a great, great person, very interesting, very sure of himself. Little fellow, about 5 feet 2 or 3, and with a deep voice, or deep resonant voice. When he spoke with authority, and he was a genius, no question in my mind about that. He was the one also who gambled. We didn't have enough money to have a consulting engineer prepare drawings on which the contractors could bid. The result was that he ventured his own capital, spent about $250,000 in payroll, and came up with about 60 pages of blueprints on which the American Bridge, Bethlehem Steel, and other steel contractors and foundation contractors could bid, so that we could go to the financiers and say, this project is going to cost X million dollars, and we're going to have so many, that's how many bonds we'll need to sell, and do so with authority rather than picking some figure out of the thin air for bond underwriting.
You know, the greatest wind storm that has ever been recorded in the vicinity of Mackinac is 78 miles an hour. That corresponds to a wind pressure of 20 pounds per square foot. We took that figure of 20, we multiplied it by 2.5, and we assumed a wind pressure of 50 pounds per square foot for the design of this bridge.
It was funny, he made the statement that, and he said it clearly, theoretically the bridge is aerodynamically perfect and could stand winds, theoretical winds up to 600 miles an hour. The newspapers picked it up and ran headlines, Mackinac Bridge withstands winds of 600 miles an hour. And they would never change it. I mean, it was great. And it was embarrassing to him and to the rest of us who knew that that was a theoretical statement. But it is just about aerodynamically perfect as any bridge can be.
I remember the day that they had the ceremony for the bridge starting, and it was around the 4th or 5th of May, I think, in 1954. And they had the groundbreaking, and my mother was there, and Governor Williams, and all the members of the authority. And they had a great groundbreaking. The jets flew over, and that was kind of exciting for us up here, too. That was the start of the bridge.
The two primary construction firms hired by the Bridge Authority to build the structure were Merritt, Chapman & Scott and the American Bridge Division of U.S. Steel. Merritt, Chapman & Scott would build the 34 massive piers required, while American Bridge would manufacture and construct the superstructure. Ed Haltenhoff was the chief engineer for Merritt, Chapman & Scott and later became the operations manager for the Bridge Authority. The two main tower piers were built using a caisson design. These were large double-walled cylinders which were fabricated in Gary, Indiana and assembled in a shipyard in Alpena, Michigan, nearly 80 miles from the straits. Ed Haltenhoff.
The caissons, 19 and 20, the shells were originally built down in Alpena and launched and towed up by tug. When in Alpena, there was a couple of problems that we had, one of which meant we had to refloat a caisson and patch it because of some dynamiting that we were using to try to break through to form a channel out to the lake so towing could begin. So it took about 3 weeks or so to straighten that one out down there. And then, of course, when the caissons were brought up and put in these corrals that we had a constant problem with them spinning like a top. It wasn't necessarily in only one direction. They'd pick the direction they wanted to go. But the mass of the steel made it almost impossible to stop them, even with very, very large-sized cables. Of course, as the sinking progressed, this was less and less of a problem, and pretty soon it disappeared.
Getting the caisson down to bedrock was a carefully calculated, painstaking process that required more than 6 months to complete.
The first stage, of course, getting a foothold, and that was accomplished in the first construction season. They got 6 of those foundations in, the 6 most important ones. And to me, it looked just absolutely fantastic. And we're off and running. I could see a bridge physically before it was purely mental.
The trestle that you see sticking out the top was a construction innovation, a need that we had. We had to get a crane up very high to work on this. We couldn't work on it from the water. In addition to that, we wanted some stability so that we could work on days when the weather was rough. So we constructed one of these trestles on each of the piers. They were removed later when the construction was done. The cranes were placed up there by the rig, one of the rigs that you see there. And when the work was done, they were removed in the same way.
With the coarse aggregates in place, an intrusion mortar is injected under pressure. Pipes through which the grout is pumped into the aggregate are positioned at 20-foot intervals. As the mortar level rises, these pipes are raised and the process is repeated.
All of the rigs had names. Previously, we had just seen a shot of one of the 35-ton rigs that was called the Seminole. This amounted to mixers on the scow, and it would work along with one of the rigs with a sand scow on one side and a cement and fly ash scow on the other. The cement and fly ash would be put up into the bins with a pneumatic system. The sand would be put up into the hopper, as you're seeing being done right now, by the rigs. And so it was a self-contained type of operation. I believe that if we had to use conventional concreting methods, and I'm certainly that I'd get a lot of support for this from an engineering perspective, that it would have taken probably 2 to 3 times longer to build the bridge than it actually did.
The cost of building the Mackinac Bridge was almost $100 million. High-level construction workers have a rule of thumb that says for every $10 million spent on such a project, 1 life will be lost. This was not true with the building of the Mighty Mac. However, 5 people did lose their lives. James R. Lesarge, an employee with Merritt, Chapman & Scott, fell to his death while working on the foundation for Pier 20. Within a month of this tragedy, another life was lost. This time it was diver Frank Pepper.
Diving work was very important to the operation because when you work in the water, there's always the need to work underwater. And the divers were the specialists that did this for us. We had several divers on the project. They all wore what we call hard hats, the old-time type of equipment that's still used today because of the conditions under which these construction divers work. But these people would be able to go down there and do amazing things such as burning steel and welding and measuring and patching and doing many things underwater. Unfortunately, the diver that we're looking at is one that was killed on the project. This diver's name was Frank Pepper. For whatever reason, he popped up to the surface by putting air into his suit, and as a result, he ended up in the decompression chamber, which we had available. And unfortunately, the pressure chamber did not bring full recovery, and a few days later, Frank passed away.
Despite these 2 tragic deaths in 1954, the workers were able to make great progress in establishing a foothold in the straits during the first season of bridge construction. The weather was so mild that work on the foundations was able to continue into January of the following year.
These people were very, very astounded to find that we were able to work until the 14th of January. But I specifically remember on the 14th of January, Grover Denny, the project manager, coming into my office and telling me that today was it, that he was going to shut the job down today. And I was usually the one that got the weather reports and gave him advice as to what was going on. And of course, my advice was no better than the weather person's. But that day, there was nothing in the weather report that said there was going to be any problems as far as cold and storm. Well, the project manager proved to be perfectly right and the weatherman traditionally wrong, because all of a sudden, towards the afternoon, the wind started to blow, and it was a real race for us to get the equipment from the lake, from the straits, around the bend into St. Ignace Harbor, where they would be safe. And then immediately we winterized and never got back out until the spring again. How Grover Denny knew that that was the day, I'll never know, but perhaps that's why he was the project manager.
In the meantime, American Bridge had all kinds of structure going on. The railroad yard here in St. Ignace was just full of steel.
The steel work, to describe it in the terms of one of the consulting engineers, is like an erector set. They design the steel and they form it and cut it and put it together in a yard. I walked on the towers of the Mackinac Bridge when they were laid out flat on the yard.
Once the foundation work was essentially finished, the next step was to bring in American Bridge and a special breed of men, the ironworkers. J.C. Stillwell was one of them. He still resides in Mackinac City and runs the Mackinac Bridge Museum. He is also the head of the International Ironworkers Festival, which is held there every summer in the shadows of the mighty Mac.
But we had men from all over the world, and California. Most of them drove black cars and Airstream trailers, silver Airstream trailers. You could know, and we call them boomers. They boom from one bridge to another, one state to another. They're a bunch of hell of guys.
Hundreds of men setting new erection and safety records while working 2 shifts for 42 months.
The construction period was the forerunner of many, many economic changes for the Straits of Mackinac. St. Ignace was primarily the town that was going to be responsible for housing 400, 500, 600 workers who would come and build the bridge. The iron workers, the foundation people. It was really an exciting time. The restaurants, the motels, the theater, the churches, and everybody else seemed to have a real upbeat attitude when it came. And it was a real boom town, as was Mackinac City.
I'm told, I never attended one, but I'm told there was a continuous crap game at one of the hotels. I mean, one shift would come on, one shift would go off, and the game never stopped. I'm not, whether that's apocryphal or not, I'm not sure, but it's a good story.
You could get a plate of spare ribs and a bath and for $3 down there. It was just a place to be.
While that establishment left the area with most of the ironworkers, J.C.'s museum remains a popular stop in Mackinac City. Many an ironworker has hung his hat there.
The hard hats and stuff here are the beginning of the museum. Some of them are original hard hats come off the bridge, some of them are personal prints. Everything upstairs is the Mackinac Bridge Museum, and it is solely come off the Mackinac Bridge. The rest of the stuff in here I collected through the years from 1954 through.
The ironworkers were in business, and as Ed Haltenhoff states, the structure was to be unique in many ways.
Important to note is that all of this was riveted construction. This was not, as we use commonly in modern construction, bolting.
The tongs we use to throw the rivets, and then the forge is to the left there. The forge is filled with coal and red hot. The rivets come out to 500 or 600 degrees. I don't know, they're quite hot anyway.
This creeper derrick climbed up between the towers, using the towers for supports, similar to what an inchworm, how an inchworm would work it, and that would then place the tower sections one on top of the other. We'll see that working now as they go skyward.
1955 was a very busy season for the ironworkers. From July to November, concentration was on completing the 2 main tower piers, each climbing over 55 stories above the straits.
I worked with some awesome men. They were gorgeous, rough but good. Seems like the higher they went, the softer they talked. First I went out there, I thought maybe I was with a bunch of other guys. They'd call you baby and honey. And it seemed like the higher they got, the more closer to their partner they got, because if one of you made a mistake, the other one might be dead. So you watched each other like hawks up there. It was a very good job.
One October day, they were topping off the towers. And I believe this would have been late 1956. Anyway, it was blowing, blowing, blowing. It was really blowing hard. Coming from the southwest, which is usually a fair weather wind, but it can be a strong wind. And I couldn't believe what I saw. He said, Mr. Brown, he said, you're going to go up to the top. And I had my camera, movie camera, and we went up in a barrel, which is hooked on. And of course, you go up was 500 and some feet from water to the top. So it was maybe a 300-foot lift. Anyway, we got on the west side of the South Tower Pier, and they finally brought up the last piece, the top-off piece, where the ironworkers were. And the top of the west side of that tower pier is in 4 sections. So they brought up a quarter of the top section. Anyway, they got to the top and they set it down, and then these fellas went out on the outside of this pier, 300 feet drop to the lake, at least, and pinned it. And then 4 of these ironworkers in that howling wind got up, and then they put up a flag. They all stood up, and the space probably wasn't bigger than, say, 4 by 5 or 6, which is 1/4 of that tower pier. And anyway, every time I go by that tower pier, I say, boy, those guys are lucky they didn't fall off that thing.
Winter rolled into the Straits early in '55, shutting down construction sooner than the previous season. Yet work continued in the rail yards in St. Ignace. Steel structures for the roadways were arriving and needed to be assembled so that they could be barged out onto the piers in 1956. But before the roadways could be set, cables needed to be spun, and this required a catwalk, the bridgeman's walkway in the sky.
This catwalk actually is made out of cyclone fence that was put together on shore in rolls, and then kicked off the tower, actually, to allow the making of the catwalk. When this catwalk is kicked off the top of the tower, actually kicked off because it's fastened and then pushed down and let to slide by gravity on screw eyes. This was where the 2 American bridge workers met their death. They were working on spreading the catwalk at the time on the top of the tower, and something snapped, whatever it was, and both of them plunged down to the water.
The 2 men who lost their lives were Jack Baker of Pagosa Springs, Colorado, and Robert Copeland of Plymouth, Michigan. 2 other ironworkers who fell with a bundle of fencing that day were able to grab onto the fencing as it dangled over the straits. With the encouragement of their co-workers, they managed to climb up the fencing and were rescued. The work continued, and once the catwalk was completed, work began on spinning the 2 main cables of the Mighty Mac.
These are the 2 wheels. There's one on each side that spin the cable back and forth.
What we see here is a couple of workers taking the wire off the wheel that just arrived, and they're going to now put 2 new wires, or I should say 1 loop, forming 2 wires on the wheel to send it back in the opposite direction. And the supply of cable or of wire is up on top of the superstructure.
And we had a lot of instances on the job there. Like one time we was over on Pier 22, me and my buddy Curly Olson, and we was always arguing who could run across that catwalk fastest. That was before the cable was there. It was just a swinging stage, what we call the catwalk. So the boss, about 3 o'clock that afternoon, he said, well, you guys have been arguing all the time. I'll see you bet a fifth of whiskey and see who can get across that catwalk. And that's going up over Tower 20 and 19 and down through the middle. It's about a 4-mile run.
Up and down.
Up and down, yeah. Anyway, he beat me on the first tower, and I got him on the second tower, and so we went down, got the fifth of whiskey, and sat down and had a beer.
This is one of the teams that would compete against each other, spinning the cable. Both cables were spun at the same time or laid at the same time on either side, and there was a competition between the crews that were doing the laying, one at each anchorage, and then, of course, some men scattered out along the scaffold, to see who could do the most in one shift and who could get finished sooner than the other. We could see here an ironworker getting ready to let the wheel, the spinning wheel, pass by. There was a kind of a clanking bell sound that was on the wheel to warn workers that it was in their vicinity so that they would be able to be on the alert and duck if it was coming close to them. You can see the wires now, they're being bundled into portions of wires that will then be bundled into the 24.5-inch diameter cable when it's complete.
340 wires were to be banded into a single strand. Then, In a predetermined order, 37 strands were to be assembled into a single cable.
Actually, spinning the cable is a misnomer. The cable is not spun, it's laid in wires, individual wires that are bundled together into groups, and then the groups are banded together into a total wire. And then there's a covering put over the top of that, which perhaps could look like spinning. It wraps around the cable. I think the term spinning comes from the appearance of the type of equipment that's being used rather than what the equipment is doing.
The cable spinning operation went on for 24 hours a day until it was completed. During this time, the Bridge Authority received a letter from a lady who wanted to know how they expected a car to climb up and down the steep slopes. They informed her that the cable spinning platforms were not the actual road. When the spinning operations were completed, over 42,000 miles of wire had been laid in the two main cables. The structure was becoming famous, not only to those on the ground, but to a certain few in the air.
Yes. We had several planes fly underneath during construction, notably a National Guard plane with, I think, 11 members of the National Guard in it, and one of them, we didn't get the numbers, but one of them squealed.
He flew under it. He was with the Army or Navy or something. They grounded him. He flew under it when we were building the bridge, and they didn't go for that.
When the workers were pulled off the straits at the end of '56, work continued in the steel yards at St. Ignace on the remaining suspension trusses that would hold up the roadway.
The last 2 years we worked in the yard putting these sections together and then floating them out on the barge. So we had 2 winters we worked and 2 winters we didn't work. So that gave you the 42 months.
On May 17, 1957, the last of the suspended bridge truss sections was hoisted into place. For the first time, the 2 great peninsulas of Michigan were now linked by a bridge of concrete and steel.
Rather than having solid concrete deck as we do on the approach spans, Steinman decided the best thing there would be to use an open metal grid for a portion of it and a grid filled with concrete for another portion. The idea here was to be able to allow wind forces or wind itself to go up through the bridge, through the open portion of it, and still give a good riding surface. Going across the bridge on the open grid is something that a lot of drivers don't particularly care for, because it does make a buzzing and it does seem like your car is not being steered properly. But in fact, there's nothing really to be concerned. It's just part of the design.
And the design of the Mackinac Bridge incorporated a number of innovative cost-saving and recycling procedures. One was the key ingredient of the foundation mix, which was fly ash, a byproduct of Detroit Edison's coal-fired generating plants. The suspension cables for the catwalk were stretched and reused as the suspender cables that hold up the roadway. This log carrier was used by the contractors to carry the grid for the roadway.
The construction schedule called for the bridge to open November 1st. They were having difficulty, caused by weather, of getting the steel plates, the grid, as we call it, getting that welded down. And they wanted an extension, and I threatened that if they couldn't get their grids down, we'd get wooden planks and put them in and run cars across on November 1st, come hell or high water. Well, the problem was overtime. And they solved that by spending a few bucks, and the bridge was open and complete so far as handling traffic was concerned. At the end of 42 and a half months, the bridge was open right on schedule, November 1st, 1957. It was a beautiful November. Temperature running about 40, 50 degrees, sun shining. It was a gorgeous day, and the strange part of it was, as the executive officer, I recommended to the authority that we do not hold a big celebration in November for fear the weather would be bad. And had it been that way, any kind of a celebration would have been out of the question. You couldn't even stand up on the deck out there. But it turned out to be a gorgeous day, and so we planned the dedication in June. We had gale-like storms that week. We planned a week-long dedication, and floats were destroyed, tents were blown down, everything that we possibly could go wrong did until the last 2 days of the dedication. It was a 6-day event, and the last 2 days it cleared up. So all's well that ends well, and people were real pleased and happy.
My father, I think it was in 1955, he suffered a heart attack, and I'm sure it was because of the strain on him in doing not only what he had to do in Detroit for Detroit Edison, but also for this magnificent project. But he was the chairman of the opening ceremonies in not only in November of 1957, but also the following June in 1958. I think of all the accomplishments that he felt that he was a part of, Mackinac Bridge stands out as one of his fondest dreams that came true.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great day for our Michigan. Today, on firm foundations, reaching as far as 200 feet below these waters, we gaze upwards to towers higher than the Washington Monument. The graceful catenary of the sinewy cables are a delight to the eye as they mount from the deep-set foundation on the south, up and over the tall towers, across the wide channel, and on down again to this mass of concrete on which we now stand. They support 200 feet in the air the roadway of thousands of tons of steel, wrought of the iron ore, mined in our Michigan's Northland, that will carry in safety, amid breathtaking beauty, the coming millions over the blue waters of the world's greatest lakes. It is thrilling, it is satisfying. We are happy to unite our Michigan.
Oh, he was a great man, absolutely a great man. And it hadn't been for him, there wouldn't be any bridge. There are a great many people who deserve credit for the structure. Governor Williams, for example, took a leading position, and a number of other persons went out on the limb, so to speak, to advocate the bridge project. But it was Prentice Brown's prestige and his never-failing courage to continue.
And Governor Williams obviously deserves a great deal of credit politically for getting this thing going. He piqued the imagination of the people of the state of Michigan to have this bridge finally connect the two peninsulas.
This indeed is a tremendously great day for Michigan. At long last, after nearly 100 years of dreaming about a physical link between our two peninsulas, the Mackinac Bridge is a reality. Michigan is at last fully and literally one state. Today, we, the people of Michigan, give this bridge to America. We dedicate it to the national good as a key link in America's system of a modern arterial highway, as a great gate to the outdoor vacation land of northern Michigan and western Ontario, and as a new northwest passage for the transit of goods and passengers.
The first person, as I recall, who went across the bridge was Governor Williams and his wife Nancy, and my father Prentice Brown, and my mother Marion Brown. And so it was Governor Williams, and he bought the first ticket. They wanted to impress upon the public that there were no free passes, and even the governor of the state of Michigan had to pay his fare. So he plunked out the $3.75 for crossing the bridge, and that had significance. And of course it led to what we all consider a very successful financing of that bridge. It paid the bills, it paid the interest, it paid the principal. The $3.75 was about the fare that the ferries had charged to cross.
Today we are celebrating a dream come true. With the aid of divine providence, our dream of years has been fulfilled.
In humility and reverence, we dedicate this work of faith, and with pride we behold what vision, courage, and determination have wrought.
Since the Mackinac Bridge opened to traffic, only one life has been lost as a result of a vehicle going over the side. Quite remarkable for a bridge of such enormity. But there are people who are afraid to cross the structure. Larry Rubin.
It's just the strangest reaction you ever saw. It can be a husky, burly truck driver, and he'll cower in the back seat of our police cars, put a blanket over his head or whatever, and go across the bridge in that manner. And some of them were regulars who had to make the trip back and forth, and they'd come in the office, it's okay, get me a driver, I'm ready. But I guess the most unusual one was the doctor who came up with some of his friends to hunt. They came across northbound, but when they were ready to go southbound, he wouldn't go. He absolutely would not go across on the bridge. He said, suffered enough coming northbound, he wasn't about to do it southbound. He wanted to know where he could charter a boat. Well, I'll make a long story short. We arranged for him to charter a boat run by one of our patrol persons off duty. And it was about a 14-foot aluminum boat, and by the time they were ready to go, the winds in the straits had come up, and they were running through 4-foot waves in this little boat, which is 10 times more dangerous than, 100 times more dangerous than being on the bridge.
There is nobody buried in the concrete.
That's a standard belief around the world, that every bridge has somebody buried in the concrete, but it's not so.
The world has changed a great deal since 1957. Could the Mighty Mac be built today? And if so, what difficulties might it face?
Of course, we would have a problem today if we were going to build a bridge due to environmental conditions now that perhaps wouldn't permit the excavation to be just simply dumped back into the Straits of Mackinac. However, at that time, the environmental conditions were not that strict. And of course, this is another reason why we have to look at the bridge as being so easily built within the time frame.
Whatever happened to the ferry service between Mackinac City and St. Ignace?
Well, they went out of business the same day the bridge was opened. Yeah, we would never have been able to finance the bridge if the ferries remained in competition. That was one of the major provisions of the legislation, that within 10 miles either side of the straits there could be no ferry service.
St. Ignace and Mackinac City were always great railroad towns, and they were great boat towns, because we had all kinds of ferries around here. And it was difficult for him to know that a lot of the the ferry workers would be losing their jobs. But he arranged, as did Governor Williams, to have most of these people who were displaced as ferry workers go to work for the highway department all over the state of Michigan.
They used to line up there for sometimes back to Sheboygan, 15 miles, plus the dock was full. They wait as high as 23 or 4 hours to get on the boat.
Had it not gone through when that legislation was passed, interest rates would have changed to such a degree that they would still be ferrying cars across the straits the way they did 38 years ago.
You know, the hunters used to enjoy waiting for the boat there. They'd drink and have sandwiches, and get somebody to drive their car and go uptown and browse around for a couple hours.
But if the bridge wasn't here, we would have a situation similar to what you see in Puget Sound, Seattle, where there are huge ferries, fast ferries, and it still couldn't handle the traffic. It still would, I think, be a economic blow to the Upper Peninsula as well as the north end of the Lower Peninsula.
They'd be lined up to Detroit to get on the boats now. You know, as much traffic as we increase it. So it's been a good thing for us.
But what became of the ferries that used to form the link between Michigan's two peninsulas?
One of them is a potato boat, and there's a couple of them barges. And the old vacation land, they sold it to Japan. It sunk going across the ocean. So it's down underneath the sea.
Since the bridge opened nearly 40 years ago, what has the effect been on the two bridgeheads, Mackinac City and St. Ignace? Let's ask a local innkeeper.
Hi, my name is Mike Derry. This is my wife, Chris.
Hello.
We're the managers at the Ottawa Motel in Mackinac City.
Yeah, the bridge walk is fun. I walked it the last 3 years. It is a very long walk, but it's beautiful to be up on that bridge.
Mackinac's the place.
The bridge has been very good to Mackinac City as far as I can see. It is, at one time they thought that the south side would dry up. Since the bridge has been built, Mackinac City has grown business-wise quite a bit.
The perception of the Upper Peninsula before the bridge was one of trees and cedar savages. I mean, that was the put-down with which the Upper Peninsula had to deal. Now people are finding out that the Upper Peninsula is the most historic place in Michigan area. It was settled before the downstate area was. I wouldn't want to live any place else. As you can see, as you look out the window here, it's doesn't come much better.
When you travel in and around the Straits area, there are two items that seem to be advertised more than anything else: fudge and pasties. While fudge is a widely understood term, pasties isn't. So just what is a pasty? And who makes the best?
I think the UP does. They originated here.
Got a real good recipe. We got it from the UP. We just make a couple trays at a time here.
Get one as we get the assembly there
Get
too.
the assembly one? All right.
Yeah.
This is the chicken one. Once you took out the other beef, this is the other meat.
Custom install of the goodies.
Just right, just do
Some
everybody's
together, it
little
looks
crimp
just like a
around
machine
way.
there.
Wow.
I'm Ralph Williams, and always lived in Mackinac here. We had a gas station here for 12 years. In the last 18, we've had the donut shop. We've been on this corner for 30 years. Been here since the bridge opened. I was across the street at a gas station at 57. So we've seen a lot of changes over the years. Hotels springing up, gift shops, restaurants. The population hasn't really grown that much. It stays around the 1,000 population, but we got probably 100 more businesses than we had 25 or 30 years ago.
Before the Mackinac Bridge Authority started any construction on the structure, they elected to hire one photographer to cover all stages of the building of the Mighty Mac. The person they hired was Herman D. Ellis, a noted photographer, teacher, and lecturer. Most of the footage in this program and other programs about the bridge was shot by Herm Ellis. He was a fearless professional whose work displayed tremendous talent and sometimes humor. Here's a scene from one of his travel logs, Islands of the Great Lakes. It's a dream sequence of Herm's showing him placing a flag on top of one of the main towers of the Mighty Mac. Herm died in 1975, but his amazing images of the mighty Mac will be around for a long, long time. But what about the bridge? It's been with us for nearly half a century now. How long will it last?
If it's properly maintained and kept up, it'll last 1,000 years or so. Eventually, I suppose, metal fatigue sets in. We haven't had any indication of that yet, and it's a relatively new phenomenon. But this Dr. Steinman was convinced it would last as long as the pyramids.
When we build, let us think that we build forever. Let it not be for present delight, nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for, and that men will say, as they look upon the labor and wrought substance of them, see, this our fathers did for us.
And, you know, for my dad, who had been in the high councils of government, state and federal, to think that Mackinac Bridge was the most important thing to him, you know, speaks well for the dream come true.
I've been close to tears several times today, but probably closer now than ever before. Thank you all very much.